This is Metro Week. Our top story, Native Americans in the Tucson area. First, we'll hear how young people want to connect with their tribes when they no longer live on the reservation. Then, a new level of learning in American Indian studies and an educational struggle on the Gila River Indian Reservation.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. This week, a series of stories on Native Americans, including how they connect to tribal lands and education. We'll stray from our typical format by foregoing the Journalists' Roundtable. We'll start with a look at demographics. Arizona has held steady at between 5 and 6% of the state population self-declaring as American Indian for the past 25 years, according to census data. That means they make up a bigger proportion of the state's population than African Americans and much smaller than the state's largest ethnic minority, Hispanics. The number of Native American students at the University of Arizona is about half the statewide population proportion. For example, in 2013, the census estimates 5.3% of the state was American Indian. In the 2014 school year, the U of A says about 2.8% of the students reported tribal heritage. The proportion of Native American students at the U of A grew faster than overall enrollment grew. The Native American student population went up by about 50% from 1994 to 2014. The student body grew by about 20% in the same time. Last school year, all minority groups made up almost 38% of U of A students. This fall's enrollment is projected to have an even bigger minority population that is likely to set a record. The Native Nations Institute is a research unit at the University of Arizona. A year ago, it began studying how connected young people feel when they no longer live on their tribe's reservation. I spoke with researchers Stephanie Rainey and Jennifer Schultz about the initial findings of their study. Jennifer, let's start by just having you discuss what you studied.
Back in the summer of 2014, the Native Nations Institute began conducting an online survey of non-resident tribal citizens. That is, tribal citizens living away from tribal lands. And the reality today is that for tribal citizens, they're as likely to live within tribal lands as they are to live without them. So tribal citizens, a vast majority, are living away. And this presents interesting strengths and challenges and opportunities for tribes, but very little is known about these populations. So we were interested in learning more. And yeah.
Were you looking at all age groups or specific pieces of the generations?
Well, that's an interesting question. We targeted young people to start with. We thought this would be an appropriate age group to look at making changes in life, kind of being at a certain life stage about where you're going to live, how you're going to engage with your community. But what we found was that citizens of all ages were really interested in this topic. So the most common response was 29 for age, which was the highest age limit in our survey. And we think that means that people who were perhaps even 30 or 31, maybe even older, might have responded to this survey because they were really interested in the topic.
And what did you find?
Well, generally we found that citizens, no matter how engaged they were with their tribe or with their local Native community where they live right now, were much more interested in becoming more engaged with their tribe.
Whether they already lived on tribal land, on reservation, or off?
Well, all of our participants lived off of tribal lands.
Some had lived on tribal lands and others never had, but basically all were interested in becoming very highly engaged with their Native nations. And so the interesting thing that we found, we also asked them, well, how engaged do you want to be? We were interested not just how engaged are you or what's the quality of your engagement now, but do you want to be engaged? And there was evidently a mismatch between what people wanted and what people had. And so the goal of the survey really was to find out what people had, what people wanted, and then to talk about what was working for them with respect to their Native nations. So lots of participants shared things that were currently working great for engaging them with their home nations. And we also asked what ideas they might have for how could a tribe who wants to enhance their engagement with these populations who are living away, how could a tribe do that efficiently, cost effectively, and so on?
Let's get into some of those specifics. What did people actually suggest that they would rather do to be engaged with their tribes?
Well, one of our findings was that for this age group, or the 29-year-olds who responded, many were engaged with the education departments, and that's not difficult to understand since probably many of them were in school. But what they spoke about very eloquently, and about half of our respondents, we had 74 respondents, about half of them gave us great verbal, written prose about how they wanted to engage more with their communities. And so the opportunities they're looking for are employment, coming back for ceremony, and
timely communication.
Timely, yes.
So a lot of participants would say, you know, I wish I heard about the council meeting earlier. I could have made a visit, you know, or stuff like that. So they were really interested in creative ways for the tribe to continue to communicate with them, like how maybe social media, maybe webcasting of tribal meetings, stuff like that. They also, one participant suggested really creatively, you know, I've never lived on tribal lands. I don't have that much connection to the people who are living there, but wouldn't it be great if the tribal government could possibly set me up with a pen pal or a web chat buddy and better understand my culture, where I come from, and where's my place in this community. So I thought that was great.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Did you guys focus just on Arizona residents, or was this a broader study?
Well, this was a pilot study, which meant we did it on the cheap. And we sent out emails via listservs, but we also used Facebook and Twitter to get respondents. And so we had respondents for across the U.S. from a number of tribes.
22 states, 38 tribes.
38 tribes, yeah.
Were represented, and not everyone listed their tribal affiliation, so those were just those that were listed. So we suspect perhaps even more tribes. Yep.
And what do you hope to do with the information now that you have it? You mentioned this pilot study.
It is. We hope to engage with tribes in some ways. We've had some tribes who are interested in possibly surveying their citizens who live off of tribal lands. But there's also interest in a larger, broader study to find out more about tribal citizens living off tribal lands and their engagement from a larger perspective, I think.
Right. Like what would happen if we could get some kind of baseline funding to provide a more representative sample and more rigorously characterize their experience?
Thank you both for taking the time to come in today.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
A link to that report is available on our website. For a personal perspective, I spoke with Andrew Martinez. He's a University of Arizona student who lived on his tribe's reservation in California. He says he wants to be more connected to both his California tribe and his Arizona tribe. Andrew, start by setting up your background and your tribal citizenship. Where are you from?
I originally grew up in San Diego, California, on the Mesa Grande Indian Reservation out there. In 6th grade, my parents moved off reservation, basically just looking for a better life because there wasn't much going on there on the reservation. My mom worked for Pacific Bell at the time, and my dad was a firefighter on Camp Pendleton Marine Base.
And of course, now you live in Tucson.
Yes. In 2010, my then fiance or girlfriend, now wife, moved to Tucson. She started her PhD here at the University of Arizona, and I went back to school at Pima Community College.
So you're living off reservation, you're not living where you grew up or on any of your tribal affiliated lands. What is that experience like for you in terms of how connected you feel?
It's a big difference, especially coming from California all the way out to Tucson. It's about a 6-hour drive back home. Likewise, it's about a 2-hour drive up to see my family in Salt River. So it's a weekend trip away. It's good when I get to go back. I get to get caught up on what's going on the reservations when I go home at that point.
So you're also a student employee at the Native Nations Institute. Is that how you got connected and were actually able to take the survey?
Yes. Jen Schultz was the one who asked me to take the survey.
And what did you think when you were filling out those answers about how connected you feel? What were some of the responses you gave?
It wasn't something that I necessarily thought about right off because as a student, we're pretty busy. And as a student employee, that adds another layer to it. So when I actually sit back and thought about it, it's like, well, there's not that much connection there between my Native Nation, either back home in California or in Salt River, and myself. So I really started to think back and wonder, like, how are they communicating with me? And most of it's through mailers, through online voting, ballots, and stuff like that.
So you can still vote in elections and things just like somebody who doesn't live in their home state can from afar.
Correct.
Okay. So how much more connected would you like to be? Are you good with the level of connectedness and engagement you have, or do you seek more?
I would seek more, and more so I would put that on myself to go out there and start asking questions and starting those conversations. Because right now I'm taking advantage of a tribal scholarship, and they're paying for everything for my schooling. And I'd like to go back and show them what that can do for the nation.
Now, tell me a little bit about your career and what you'd like to do with your business degree after you graduate. You mentioned to me earlier that you do want to work with a tribe.
Yes, so I'd like to work with my tribe specifically to assist them in any way that I can to get development going, good governance structures established. Overall, though, working with the Native Nations Institute is a great opportunity for me because I get to see different examples of what is successful governance and economic development in Indian country. And those are examples that I can take back to my nation in California or in Salt River and say, hey, this is what's going on out there. This is what's working.
Tell me how your experience growing up living on a reservation and then as an adult living off a reservation, how that shapes what you do want to do with your career.
Living on the reservation was great because I was close to my friends, I was close to family. As soon as we moved off the reservation, I instantly felt this disconnect. And we're kids, so there was a little pushback from my friends, like, oh, you left the res. I was like, there's not much you can do about it. It's your parents' decision to move off the reservation. But at the same time, when I go back home now, it's still hugs and smiles when I see them, all my friends back home. So it's great to have that and to come back home too, because you do feel like you're home. When you're off the res, you don't feel as connected to the area. I do love Tucson. There's a lot I love about it, but when I go home, it's just a complete different feeling on the reservation.
What's different about it?
It's just, there's a history there with your people. And I do have ties to Tucson via my family, but at the same time, it's where I grew up and ran around and up in the fields and in the mountains and chased animals and stuff. And so that was the fun part of growing up and knowing that my ancestors were there doing the same things or doing similar things. It's just that initial tie to it, that foundation, I should say.
You mentioned that you're a weekend trip away from either of the reservations. How often do you make that trip as a student who also has a job?
That's the difficult part. Making those trips is like a commitment, definitely, to go back out to San Diego for the weekend. That doesn't happen as often as I'd like, being a student and a student employee at the same time. And going up to Salt River, I was actually just up there this weekend. It was great to see my family up there.
And you mentioned that you'd like to work in tribal governance in your career. Would you rather do that on your own reservation land with your own community, or would you mind working on another land?
I wouldn't mind working on another reservation or with other Native governments. I would like to definitely do something to make an impact, though, back home.
The other thing is you mentioned that you feel like being more connected is on you, that it's on you to make some of the time to get there. What would you like to see from your tribal government in terms of reaching out to you more, if anything?
Right now, most of the connection is through my program, the scholarship program. If the Native leaders or my president or vice president were willing to come to the U of A, speak with the students here, just acknowledge that they're using the tribal scholarship would be great. Outside of that, even, I don't expect my tribal leaders from California to travel out to U of A just to see me specifically. I can do that when I go back home. But yeah, just I have something that I feel that I can offer, and if they're not out, well, they may not know about me also because I've been gone so long. So that's why I think it's more up to me to make that conversation started.
All right, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Promoting diversity in the healthcare workforce.
You know, it's not that anyone's against diversity, everyone's for diversity. You know, there's no anti-diversity efforts out there, right? But unless you make it a priority, things don't change. And I think that's what we've done here at the University of Arizona.
Now this week we're skipping our Journalist Roundtable and covering two stories about Native American education. Arizona Public Media reporter Mariana Dale looks at what options are available for Native American families, including some schools that are in need of improvement. How did you get started reporting on this topic?
So one of the things that I do is check in with the agencies that are responsible for holding our schools accountable. And for charter schools, that is a state board. And so one of the schools that was put on notice in the last year for its failing grades was called Hashon Preparatory, which actually serves Native American youth in Tucson. They bus them up from cells and they attend class here in Tucson. And they were put on notice because they had been receiving D's and F's from the state. And in addition, they look at other things like the kind of curriculum that they have. They also look at how much improvement the school has showed. And so they came into my radar that way.
What does on notice mean?
So it's basically, it means that they've been told that their grades do not meet the standards that the board has set out. And so they need to improve those, otherwise they risk being closed.
What makes these schools different?
And so one of the things about charter schools is that they're able to offer more of a diverse curriculum than a lot of other schools. And so Hashan, that means that they offer classes in Altham language and culture. They do traditional dances and try and incorporate a lot of those things into the curriculum of the school, which you wouldn't normally see at a public school.
And it's an Otham charter school?
Yes, it is.
Okay. You've also followed some schools on the Gila River Indian community. First, let's start with where is that?
Yeah, so Gila River Indian Community, if you're driving up the I-10 on the way to Phoenix, you're going to pass right by it. It's about 34 miles south of the Phoenix metro area. Secatone is probably one of the more recognizable cities. And so they had 2 charter high schools, and neither of those 2 schools are going to be open next year.
So what's happening to
And
students?
so those schools also posted failing grades. And so those students are going to have to seek a high school education, most likely off the reservation. The governor has said that there is one school that will offer some high school curriculum, but I've been told by the principal that those kids might be going to off-reservation boarding schools in Southern California, or they might be attending public schools in Coolidge, Casa Grande, and Florence. And so there isn't really going to be as much of an opportunity for them to get an education kind of enriched in their heritage like those charter schools were offering.
That speaks to something we covered earlier in the show about Native American youth who are living off of the reservation. I mean, boarding schools when you're still in high school is definitely far away from your reservation land, your tribal membership. What challenges are those students going to face?
And so some of them had actually attended school off the reservation before coming back to the schools on the Gila River Indian community. I went to one of the graduations for the alternative school, so that's often students who have faced some kind of hardship, whether that's that they've been adjudicated or they might have failed out of another school or failed to complete their coursework. And so I talked to several students who had either been living in the Metro Phoenix area or who had been going to class in Casa Grande, and they chose to return back to the Gila River Indian community to complete their education and really felt that they found a lot of focus there. I guess one of the things that's unique about one of the schools that was there, Vechik Himdug Mashmakud, is that it was an alternative school. And so it gave them this option to have those cultural heritage classes, but to also complete some credit recovery if they weren't able to otherwise complete high school.
You also talked to tribal officials just about what the tribe is working on in general. Is there any effort to work on tribal-oriented high schools or just these charters?
So right now, the charters were the biggest and the best option. A lot of people felt that way. And so I think there's going to be some small efforts to revisit some other options. But for the upcoming school year, it's really likely that they're going to be taking buses either 40 minutes to an hour to get to school in Coolidge or in Casa Grande, or attending some of those boarding schools I mentioned earlier.
Mariana, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Continuing with a focus on education, I interviewed Francie Washburn, a University of Arizona professor, about a new degree program, a bachelor's in American Indian Studies. The U of A is the first in the state to offer the degree, along with a master's and a doctorate in American Indian Studies. Let's start with what the timeline is for this new degree. When can students begin to enroll?
Students can begin to enroll right now.
So they can start taking the courses in the fall?
They can start taking the courses in the fall. In fact, we already have some students who are already enrolled because enrollment begins actually in March. And we had students who were enrolled in American Indian Studies minor that were interested in moving into getting a major.
And what was your role in developing this program?
Well, I was the head of the committee that had to put together all of the information, which includes everything from what courses are we going to offer, creating a couple of new courses, coordinating with other departments across campus to see if we can cross-list courses from them and include them in our program, as well as just the massive amounts of paperwork that have to be done. And then once all that's done, then of course it has to go up the series of approvals. And all of that process takes approximately a year to get done.
Now, why is the University of Arizona the first university in the state to offer the bachelor's, the master's, and the PhD in American Indian Studies?
Well, originally, let me give you a little bit of history. Our program in American Indian Studies here at University of Arizona was started in 1982. So we're a little over 30 years old, but we started out offering only graduate degrees. And the reason for that was because there were already many BA degrees and American Indian Studies minors and ethnic studies minors that were offered all across the country at other universities. We were the first to offer graduate degrees in American Indian Studies, and so we continued that. But then the other two state universities, Arizona State and Northern Arizona, offered the bachelor's degree. And so we are just now beginning to offer the bachelor's degree.
Now, sometimes I know that the state universities try not to duplicate each other. So what is the opposite? What's the argument for having all three schools offer it?
Okay, usually universities don't want to duplicate those degrees because it just takes enrollment away from each, and they end up each one having just a lower enrollment, but they have a program. And so if they can keep it all at one university, they can offer more courses, more professors, and so on. However, Arizona is a very big state. We're the third biggest state in the United States, of course, I think, or fourth maybe, but we're a huge state, and our population is spread around the state. So we have people here from Tonelatam or Yaqui, for example, that might want to get a degree in American Indian Studies, but they may not have the ability to travel to Northern Arizona State up at Flagstaff or to Phoenix. And so this is a degree that we think will enroll students who probably wouldn't have went to the other two universities. And that was one of our arguments, which every stage of the approval process agreed with.
Now, how about demographics within the degree or within the existing American Indian Studies masters and PhDs? Do you see a broad demographic makeup, or are you seeing a lot of American Indian students in those degrees?
We see a lot of American Indian students in those degrees, but American Indian Studies is for everybody. We happily admit anybody who wants to get a degree in American Indian Studies, whether that's BA, MA, or a PhD, as long as they meet the entrance requirements, everybody's welcome in our programs. I think that our student population skews more towards women than men as far as gender in our programs, and I don't know what the reason might be for that. But I think that we have a substantial number, probably at least half of our students are American Indian.
Now, how does this fit into the University of Arizona's overall goals of increasing diversity? Is this part of any recruitment effort?
It is part of that effort, and it's also aimed at increasing the number of American Indian students at the university in general, because across the country, American Indians are approximately 1% of the total population. But in the state of Arizona, it's more than 5% of the population. However, American Indian students are underrepresented. There are only 2% of students that are enrolling at the University of Arizona. And then we have problems with retaining those students once they get here and seeing them through to graduation. We're hoping that this particular BA degree will help with the retention and graduation rates for American Indian students here.
Now, do you have any role in terms of either recruitment or education directly with any of the tribes in Arizona?
We work cooperatively with all of the tribes and would like to work more cooperatively. If anybody wants our help, all they have to do is reach out, and we do try to reach out to the tribes in Arizona. There's 23 federally recognized tribes in Arizona. I suppose that we probably work closest with the Navajo Nation. There are tribal colleges there. We try to make sure that courses that they offer there at the undergraduate level can transfer to our undergraduate program here. And we also try to recruit students from the 23 tribes in Arizona, mostly by just doing a good job of educating their students, their citizens.
The U of A has a goal to have every student have some sort of out-of-the-classroom experience, whether it's an internship or a job or maybe research. What parts how will a student in this program get that out of classroom experience?
We do have internships. We've had internships from the very beginning in the master's program, and it's an option in the PhD program, and it is also a requirement for the BA program that all students have to have an internship. We have on our website, I think, something like 40 or 50 different places that students may have internship opportunities.
What are some examples of those?
Okay, right now we have students that are working with, say, the University of Arizona Press, which has a whole section of publishing that publishes American Indian publications by and for and about American Indians. We also have students who did an internship over at the Arizona State Museum working with collections of Native artifacts. We have had students who did teaching assistance jobs at Pima Community College and some of the other tribal colleges across the state of Arizona.
That sounds really interdisciplinary.
It's very interdisciplinary. Very interdisciplinary. In fact, the whole BA program is intended to be very interdisciplinary. It's intended to be a holistic, analytical examination of American Indian issues, past, present, and future. And that's a big chore, a big job to fill. But we do that by offering 4 major areas of study. All students have to take 9 units of introductory courses, which sort of puts everybody on the same page, provides historical background information, that sort of thing. And then there are 4 different divisions within the coursework. There is literature, law and policy, societies and cultures, and natural resources. And students have to take 1 class from each of those areas. Then they can take electives from any of those areas. So they get both a broad overview, but they also get an opportunity to specialize in a particular area of interest to them.
And how does a student go about choosing the U of A, or how are you attracting students to the U of A if there are bachelors at NAU and ASU? Do you have some specifics that you're trying to sell?
Yeah, well, one thing that we are trying to sell is that a student who gets a BA here is also then very well prepared to move on into an MA program or a PhD program after that. So that is one advantage here.
And I also want to ask you about your broader roles on campus in maybe Native American Student Affairs or other bigger picture Native American, American Indian student programs. What else do you work on?
Well, faculty within American Indian Studies, we have a terrific faculty there, and they are involved in a wide variety of things across campus, across the state, across the nation, across the world. But my own particular things that I have done, for example, are a couple of years ago, the ladies soccer coach contacted me and asked if I would come speak to his soccer team about American Indian values and sportsmanship. And that was a really fun and interesting thing to do. I have also spoken to groups of young women students from San Carlos Apache Reservation to encourage them to stay in school and to apply and go on to higher education. Those are just a couple of little things. I've also worked with the Arts Reach people to edit their volume of student-produced poetry, fiction, and art. So those are some of the things that I've done, but other people do other things. One of our professors has worked as a judge for Colorado River tribes.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a wide variety of opportunities for everybody.
I also have another bigger picture question for you. What if someone's not really looking into education at the U of A right now? What is the overall kind of community relevance of having a new bachelor's degree in this program in Tucson?
Well, I think that, pardon me, as I said earlier, bachelor's programs are available in American Indian Studies at NAU and at ASU, but people are not necessarily able to travel that far or can't afford to move up there, for example. So this offers an opportunity for people who might not go on to higher education at all to get higher education here on a local basis.
Francie Washburn, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Next week, we'll return to our normal format with the Journalists Roundtable. In the meantime, find all the stories we produce at Arizona Public Media on our website. There, you can listen to stories, play a live stream from 89.1, and watch past episodes of this and other TV shows. Thanks for watching.